Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. On this Friday, I'm joined by Jim Geraghty, National Review senior political editor and Washington Post columnist, my regular Friday guest. Jim, I feel I have to disclose to you that I phoned in a police report after listening to the editors this week and told them that you and Noah and Charles W. Cook had mugged Rich Lowry and that you should all be placed under arrest for that. Is Rich okay?
Rich is fine. A little while ago, when you and a couple other folks had responded on Twitter, I said that, look, every once in a while, the three other Ninja Turtles gang up on Leonardo. And Rich, of course, is Leonardo because he is our leader. He's still the
shell is broken.
No, it's a hard-shelled guy. What this did not set off, and I was a little bit disappointed by, was a discussion about, amongst Noah Rothman, Charlie Cook, and myself, which one is Donatello, which one is Michelangelo, which one is Raphael. I have strong opinions about which one is which, but I'll let listeners and readers decide.
You're in my zone, though. I'm feeling really dim-witted because I spent a half hour talking to Charles, and I just feel stupid after I talked to him. Do you feel that way after you talked to Charles C.W. Cook? I mentioned I was listening to Brideshead Revisited, and he said, my favorite book. Have you seen the Jeremy Irons movie from 1981? I said, huh? I've never listened to Brideshead Revisited before. Have you?
So, first of all, Charlie is one of the most brilliant guys I know.
Yes.
Years and years ago, when my kids were little and we were going to a National Review event, I was trying to figure out how to accurately describe them. And I basically said, kids, remember the Sherlock Holmes stories? This is him. Which is one way of putting
he's Mycroft.
Intellect.
I call my oldest brother the PhD. I call him Mycroft.
Okay. The other angle, of course, is that I'm old enough to be around when Charlie Cook had just come over from Oxford or from the UK. But he went to Oxford, by the way. And by the way, just point out, I did not go to Oxford. If I had, that would be how I'd begin every sentence.
I visited Oxford. But I've been there.
Yeah, so there you go. People ask, Stanford. I've been to Stanford. I've been to the Hoover Institution. So that's
media fellowship, I assume.
So I was at one of, I want to say it was Americans for Prosperity. They had done some event somewhere in Texas, and Charlie had been writing for a while. He hadn't been doing TV or podcasts and stuff. So this was the first time people were getting to hear Charlie speak, and so we're on this panel, and then Charlie begins in his most distinguished intellectual voice. And you just heard this intake of air from every woman in the conference. They were swooning. It was like, oh my God, he's brilliant. And he's this terrific guy. And he sounds like that. So I just like to think if I sounded like Charlie Cook, I could have already taken over the world by now.
Ben Domenech.
I think
Ben Domenech tried to fluff my pillow a little bit by saying, Jude Law sounds great, but he's not really that smart. And I said, yeah, but Charlie Cook really is that smart.
One last Charlie Cook story is that he eventually did start doing television. And he did something where he and the liberal talking head, he just had him nailed dead to rights. He just, pantsed him virtually on national television. And Charlie and the guy just was, well, I'm sure everything sounds good when you have a cute English accent. And even the hosts were like, dude, that's that, and it's like, that's what they had left. That,
he's pretty gracious. I'm pretty sure I mispronounced Evil and Wah, and he didn't correct me, which is gracious. That's gracious. Jim, we got to go to break. I got a lot to cover with you, but I want to put on the table the proposition so that people come back for the second segment. And then maybe the podcast. I listened to the editors, every minute of the editors. I kept saying, tag out, Rich, let me come in. It's all about messaging, not to Mexico's government, not to Canada's government, not to China's government, to people who think they're going to get in. Everything is a message. It's Trump theater. And so I asked him if he liked Gilbert and Sullivan, and he does. He hadn't seen Hamilton yet, which amazes me. But if you understand Trump is doing theater to message not governments, but people, it makes a lot more sense.
Hugh, how is your skeleton right now? I'm asking because I got a bone to pick with you. We do a lot of bone picking when we come back from the break.
All right, we're going to go to break, and we'll do it. And you may have to listen to the podcast to get it all, but I think it's going to take 2 segments. Don't go anywhere, America. You can find Jim Geraghty at thewashingtonpost.com. You can find him at National Review, and you can listen to his podcast, The 3 Martini Lunch. But what I really want to recommend to you, I laid out, the whole plan is There are 4 guests usually on the National Review podcast: Lowry, Rothman, Cook, and Geraghty. There are 4 on the Ruthless podcast. There are 4 on the Commentary podcast. If I can get those 12 people, if I can trick them into coming back, weekly or monthly, I have a radio show and a television show that's better than anybody's, because I got the smartest people who actually follow this stuff very, very closely, except they don't understand Trump messaging, which I'm going to educate Jim Geraghty on during the break. I'm back with Jim Geraghty. Pick that bone away, Jim.
All right. So I'll begin by being nice and not alienating the Hugh Hewitt show audience by pointing out the areas where I can see the case for the Chinese tariffs. I definitely think we have to economically decouple from there. I don't want anything that we are going to need in a conflict for us to be dependent upon China for the sourcing for that. So you could talk me into the 15% tariffs. In fact, maybe even the higher ones. I recall that Trump was talking about 60% tariffs on the campaign trail, and then he brought it down to 15%. On the Mexico, I can see the usefulness of it as a saber that you rattle. I think in the end, though, the amount of trade between the U.S. and Mexico makes this an unwise choice. And Canada, the biggest problem I have with the argument is with these tariffs is that it treats Canada, Mexico, and China indistinguishably. We're basically having the same attitudes towards all 3 of them. And I think even if you find Justin Trudeau insufferable, even if you find the Canadian, you don't treat your allies the same way you treat your geopolitical rivals, which is what, like China, and you don't do that. Mexico is kind of a grayer area. There are days they are cooperative with us. There are days that are very frustrating with us. I'm glad they're sending 10,000 troops. I think they've sent more troops in the past. I don't know if this is necessarily going to do it. I'd really like to know more about what those troops are going to do. But, Trump gets a special new fentanyl czar from Canada and acts like he's won the Super Bowl and decides that, it's off for a week, which if it doesn't come back and this was all just a negotiating tactic, all right, fine, I can live with this. But my thinking is, you listen to the way Trump talks about tariffs, he thinks that they are a Swiss Army knife, that they can do everything. They are a floor wax and a dessert topping, and that they're useful in all kinds of situations. And he's going to take it out of his pocket every time he gets. And eventually, that has serious repercussions for your relationships with other countries, including allies you'd like to stay on good terms with.
So here's my proposition. I heard it all, and you said those same things to Rich. Rich did not respond, though. He's not talking to the government. He's talking to the would-be migrants, and he's talking to the fentanyl dealers. And he's also talking to a certain amount to the kids who take fentanyl, and that's a real big number who die every year. So he's messaging using the bully pulpit in a way that we will have metrics to measure, not the first month. Doesn't matter to me what happens in the first month. It's down 90%. But the only way to message is to use that podium every day. You can't get in. Your governments aren't going to. Your governments are sending troops. Don't try to come through Canada. China, knock it off on the fentanyl. A minute till we come back, Jim. I think that you can hold 2 thoughts: that I hate tariffs, but that we have to control the border and the fentanyl.
If this works out that way, I'll be happy. And you're right that the president never speaks to just one. But the reason people hate tariffs is that, let's say you want to stop. First of all, there's not evidence that a ton of fentanyl is coming in from Canada, but fine, let's pretend that there's a problem there. You end up hurting the Detroit automakers who get a bunch of their parts from Detroit.
It was a good argument.
Goes across.
I hadn't thought that was a good argument. I heard your argument, and I nodded and I said, "Yeah, if you're on the business."
Wisconsin runs on crude oil that has to go to Canadian refineries. Now, I've been arguing we need to build more refineries in this country forever, but you can't build them like that. So the cost of gas, if this goes through, the cost of gas and gasoline in Wisconsin is going to go up 20 cents a gallon.
Stand by. We got to come back on the network. Stand by. Jim Geraghty, he made a really good argument about tariffs, but you're going to have to listen to the podcast to get that. And you also listen to the National Review podcast, and maybe he'll write it up for the Washington Post where he's a columnist. But I'm going to move on because I got 2 more stories to do with you, Jim. The news broke this morning that Ukraine, with its troops inside of Russia, advanced in 2 different directions with mechanized battalions. That's between 500 and 600 soldiers and 50 to 100 tanks or armored vehicles. 5 clicks, 3 miles for the benefit of the Steelers fans, in 2 different directions, breaking through Russian and North Korean defenses. What do you make of that?
So, possibly previewing something on the editor's desk at one of those publications that I write for. Look, first of all, the Trump promise of I'm going to end the war in 24 hours, that was never realistic. if you were afraid that Donald Trump was going to sell out Ukraine and that he was just going to reach out to Putin and say, whatever deal you want, let's just draw new border lines and call it a day, that has not come to pass. And there are reasons to feel good. This column that I wrote focuses on General
Is it in the
Kellogg,
Post?
Trump's special
I'm serious.
envoy.
Is it in the Post?
Yes. Okay,
Okay.
it's the Post. Yeah, it's the Post.
Okay.
Yeah. And my hope is it'll be up there no later than Monday. But basically, it's about Kellogg, and it's about some of the ties that he has to travel to Ukraine, and the statements he's made in the past. I would also point out that during Hegseth's testimony, he said regarding Ukraine, we know who the aggressors are, we know who the bad guys are, and we want this to end as advantageously for Ukraine as possible. But also, the war needs to end.
Oh, that's very encouraging.
As somebody who is a robust supporter of Ukrainian independence, I don't think that's a crazy or unreasonable stance to take. By the way, Noah Rothman, my distinguished colleague, might feel very differently about this. He has criticized the Kellogg put out together a plan that was basically going to be, however the battle, wherever the lines are when the negotiations end, those are the new negotiations, those are the new border lines of Ukraine. I can see why Ukrainians don't love it. The first trip I did over there, the attitude is we're going to get every square inch of that we lost, including Crimea. Second trip, there was a little bit less certainty that that was the only acceptable outcome. I may be traveling in the near future. I'll let you know, and I'll see what the attitude's going to be over there. But so I think everybody wants to get as much territory as they can before some sort of negotiated settlement comes down the pike. Now, my sense is we're not close to it. I'm going to settle this in 24 hours. Is probably now they're hoping within the first 100 days, which would be like what, April? You think? I think that's
when you went, Jim.
I think
factual question. Lindsey Graham invited me to go with him, and Salem wouldn't let me go, and that's fine. Sometime I'll get to go.
Really?
But yeah.
Okay. So here's the thing. Where I'm going to go next time, it may not be so safe. Shh, don't pretend my kids didn't hear that. But basically, both times I've been there, other than the last night when Russia was launching a whole bunch of missiles towards Kyiv, I really didn't have any.
Oh, I don't have any anxiety. Salem's insurance company doesn't want to do it. Corporations are insured. You maybe the Post has that, but we don't. Now,
I guess it's tougher to have a Hugh Hewitt show without a Hugh Hewitt. So okay, maybe that makes sense.
No, it's really not that tough at all. Dwayne can do it. Actually, but here's what I want to know factually. I've been told the destruction in Ukraine is 10 times that of Gaza, and the casualty rate, both KIA and wounded in a serious way, for just the Ukraine side, is 10 times what's happened in Gaza. And I can't really imagine that. And that is World War I again. Is that what you saw?
No. And that sounds kind of nonsensical to me. Now, what I'm going to say is that, the first trip, we went out to Bucha, the neighborhood where they'd had the mass graves, right? You go out to the suburbs of Kyiv, and during the fighting in the first couple of months, which were very, very intense, right there close to the capital city, everybody's car got destroyed. So they basically have created what used to be parking lots, basically like car graveyards, where all of these cars got piled into one giant pile. You can see buildings that were destroyed. But in that first trip, which was August 2023, whole neighborhoods had already been rebuilt. So, are there parts? It's kind of a question where are you focusing the camera? There are parts that are absolutely devastated. There are also Kyiv is a beautiful city, and it's a huge city. And you can, there are chunks of it where you would never know that there's a war going on, where they have traffic jams and open restaurants and cafes. And there are times you can totally forget that there's a war going on. And then every once in a while you hear and you're like, oh, that's an air raid siren. And I look at my traveling companions with concern, and they kind of shrug it off. And everybody else in Ukraine kind of shrugs and just goes about their life. Maybe this is a consequence of living with this for several years. But the comparison to Gaza, now I haven't been to Gaza, so I couldn't tell you, a firsthand account of that. But now here's the thing. Keep in mind also, I have been mostly in the western side of
Have
Ukraine.
You been to Mariupol?
No. It's
I've been told Odessa, that's leveled. I'm told that there are 500,000 people. It's gone.
Yeah, my perception is based on my travels, mostly in the western part. So let me, add that caveat if you need. This next trip will have a little more geographical range, so maybe I'll have a different perspective on that. But you know what? It's a country the size of Texas, so you're going to have some neighborhoods, and you're going to have some, perhaps even cities that have just been leveled, particularly close to the battle lines. But you're also going to have other parts of the country that are largely intact, in which life is going on because it has to, not because it's not. Like everybody in Ukraine knows somebody that they've lost. And as far as the military casualties that Ukraine has suffered, the official numbers are classified. But you can get rumors and stuff like that. Look, it's been heavy. When I was in Kobyl in 2023, this is a small city about the size of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, pretty close to the Belarus border. They had lost 47 young men. And so just take Oshkosh and imagine 47 men had been fought, had lost a war. Project that over the rest of the country. You get a sense of just the scale of this. Everybody in Ukraine knows somebody they've lost, either from on the battlefront or from air raids, other exploded ordnance, the initial ground fighting by the beginning. Ukraine has paid a terrible price. I don't want to state that by any stretch of the imagination. But all of these people are living out Red Dawn. These people are living out a scenario in which the literally Russian tanks are rolling through their neighborhood. And in some cases, it was, all right, the local government is like, here are some rifles, do what you can. And in a whole bunch of cases, in certain neighborhoods, like Irpin, it worked out pretty well. In certain communities, it did not turn out very well. So, this is why I find this probably the most important story I've ever covered.
I think it is.
Maybe the lab.
And it certainly is the most important story in the world right now, because it's a nuclear power with a second nuclear power against a near ally that is being supported by all our allies and ourselves, and it could go big or it could get resolved. And I think an acceptable ceasefire to Ukraine is an acceptable ceasefire to me. I'll look for your column on Monday in the Post. Jim Geraghty, National Review.